Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest on the Partygate fines from the police and what impact, if any, in the short and medium term it will have on Boris Johnson's position. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So a few days ago, the Metropolitan Police began issuing fines for laws broken related to the Downing Street parties. Obviously, from a political point of view, the attention is on how this may link in with Boris Johnson. The problem is that I do not know who was issued the fines and for what exactly. Now, if fines have been issued to members of the government, then I think we should know the names. But if it's not, if it's just members of staff, I don't really think so. Some people may think it's still a matter of public interest, but I take the view I don't like scapegoating. And as far as I'm concerned, if some junior staff are fined, but the boss isn't, that's scapegoating right there. But without knowing the identities of the people fined, I would like to know for precisely which breaches the fines were issued. I want to know the location, the time and the nature of the offences. I think that should be publicly available information without revealing the names of the people fined. I think that's also important for tying Boris Johnson down, because let's be honest, no objective person is going to believe that Boris Johnson is blameless here. The parties took place in his work area, 10 Downing Street, where he works. At least one of the parties being investigated took place in his 11 Downing Street flat. The idea that he was unaware of them is ridiculous. And yet he did deny that any parties had taken place in Downing Street to Parliament. And yet we know they took place many, many times. If Boris Johnson deliberately lied to Parliament, he must resign. Johnson is not resigning, and his MPs are not insisting that he resign, with a very small number of exceptions. So Johnson's line must be that others broke the law and he was unaware. Any other conclusion leads to Boris Johnson having to resign, because they cannot now claim that the law wasn't broken. It was broken, so Boris Johnson did mislead the House. But did he deliberately mislead the House? The thing is, it's not an easy conclusion to draw that he was unaware he was misleading the House. You first of all have to believe that Boris Johnson cannot tell the difference between a social gathering and a work gathering. At this point, it may even be worth bringing in their distraction exhibit A. Someone pointed my attention to this again this week. It keeps happening. The nonsense over Keir Starmer eating and drinking at a campaign meeting in Hartlepool just under a year ago. What's the difference between that and what Johnson is accused of? They cry in mock outrage. And some of them will be genuine. Some people will genuinely think, well, what's the difference? The issue was not the eating and the drinking. It was the gathering. The other thing people need to bear in mind is these parties took place over a great deal of time. The law was different at different points. Last April, with the Keir Starmer thing, Labour were fighting an ultimately losing campaign to retain Hartlepool in a by-election that basically the numpties should never have allowed to happen. But they did. So Starmer was filmed in the office in a meeting with the campaign team while they were campaigning. They were eating and drinking because nobody expects you to starve at work. They had to eat and drink there. Everywhere else was closed. We were in lockdown, Like I say, the eating and drinking were not illegal. You are allowed to eat. You're even allowed to eat at work. You're even allowed to drink at work. The media and Tory focus on these aspects of the parties in an attempt to muddy the waters. The law didn't prohibit that. It prohibited gatherings except for certain reasons. One of the reasons was activities necessary for work. In fact, at the time that Keir Starmer was filmed, there was also a specific clause for political campaigning at the time. So Starmer was covered two ways. But the parties in Downing Street were not necessary for the purposes of work. From the photos we've seen, you can see people drinking, not a sign of a notebook or a flip chart or a tablet. Nobody is taking notes. What sort of meeting ever takes place where you don't take notes? But even if you wish to be charitable and you say, well, I've been to meetings where there's not been any notes taken. All right, let's say they have been discussing work. So you think, okay, they were working then. Even that doesn't cover. Can I be 100% certain they weren't talking about work? Well, even given that there were some people there who were not actual workers, like the Prime Minister's wife. No, I can't be certain they weren't talking about work, but it doesn't matter. Because if they were trying to claim that it was a meeting, they could have carried it out remotely via video conferencing tools. Starmer couldn't have done that. He was in Hartlepool. Where was he going to go with it? He had to be outdoor knocking on the day. Where was he going to go for this meeting with video conferencing? He lives in London, you know. But in Downing Street, they've got their own officers with video conferencing tools. They didn't have to be gathered together to talk. That is what was illegal, not the eating and the drinking. The drinking culture was poor professionalism, not itself illegal. Sue Grade made this point herself in the bit of a report we did get to see. But the Tories like to push the focus on the eating and drinking as if we're trying to say it was a party because there was eating and drinking. No, we're saying it was a party because you gathered for social purposes, not work purposes. It wasn't essential work taking place. But they focus on the eating and drinking because then they can fool the public into thinking that Starmer's actual work meeting is somehow the same as these Downing Street parties. This is also despite the fact that the police cleared the Starmer incident when there's no particular reason to do the Labour leader any favours. He's not in charge of the police or their funding. And they fined people involved in the Downing Street parties, even though the government have a great deal of leverage over the police there. In terms of where this leaves Johnson, though, for now, he's not under major pressure immediately, but it is clear that Tory MPs have swung behind him. Remember, they don't care whether he's guilty or not. That's irrelevant. It's not a case of proving to Tory MPs that they know he's guilty. They only care if it's going to cost him the next election. You know, an MP from the SNP pointed out that Johnson evaded his question about whether he personally received a fine, because if it transpires he has, then he's finished. But, I mean, that might be true. I don't think it's certain at all. I think it could transpire that he was fined and he's still not stepped down. It would depend entirely on the public attitude. Like I say, anyone looking at the facts objectively cannot conclude anything other than Boris Johnson broke his own laws, and in a very egregious way as well. Whether or not he gets a fine is only a measure of how corrupt the police are, not how guilty Johnson is. But Johnson is not in the clear, and he knows it. That's why he's been evasive on this. He's been careful to say nothing at all about the fines. In fact, even though the police have concluded that the law has been broken, Boris Johnson is still refusing to accept that it has. I mean, why not just accept that the law was broken but that he was unaware? It's what he's implying anyway. The reason is he fears admission could still cost him. You know, not now. Like I say, his position is safe right now, that's clear. But he knows this is going to come up again. Of course, he should have got his strategy sorted before letting his deputy Dominic Raab go off on interviews. Raab admitted in an interview on Wednesday morning that the fines do prove that the law was broken. He didn't know that they were supposed to deny even the bleeding obvious. Johnson says that he'll be able to discuss the situation more when the investigation has concluded. Now, is that because he expects the investigation to carry on for years, or is he just, like he often does, not worrying about later, just dealing with it when it comes up? Who knows? And who knows when the investigation will be concluded? It's taken them 2 months to get this far. When they were given a comprehensive internal report on the parties, it still took them 2 whole months of investigating before they issued a single fine. It was not taking the police more than a few minutes to do that for ordinary people, where the evidence was much less comprehensive. I get that you take a little bit more care with something politically sensitive, but 2 months and counting is ridiculous. But the Conservatives cannot trigger a general election this year. They are not in a position to win it. 2023 can't be ruled out. You know, they are getting a little bit of a bounce back in the polls, and that will be why Tory MPs have swung back behind Johnson. Remember, it's only about whether they can win or not. The fact that they're recovering in the polls means that they're thinking, oh, panic over. But 2023 does still seem unlikely. You know, the idea that Boris Johnson can tickle along for like a whole year without pissing off the public in a big way again seems to be fanciful. The local elections in May, some people have thought might be a flashpoint. I don't think it's going to be a big issue for him. It's even possible they can make some gains. You know, even though the overall picture should be a loss for them. But that's easy for Johnson to deal with. Really easy. You know, if you're in government, you expect to take some losses. And he will claim that the losses are just the typical mid-term frustration that have no bearing on the general election voting behaviour. Which can be true. It's very common for the party in government to take losses in local elections and then still get voted in with the majority at the general election. But Johnson can also trumpet any gains from the rooftops. He'll be like making out, oh, but the party in government never makes gains, even though that's also not true. And expect the Tory media to play along. So I don't actually, unless the local elections are quite spectacular. And there could be, the cost of living could impact it. Who knows? but it's not a given that it's going to be a flashpoint for Johnson. So the next period of vulnerability is likely to be more personal. The Ukraine crisis isn't going to cover for him forever, even if the war rages on. It will not be front page news for the duration. Indeed, that's already been scaled back. There's been quite a few days now where other stories have been plastered across the front pages. The Sun even gave up yesterday and put a burglary in London on their front page. And when the next scandal emerges, Partygate will come back with a vengeance again. There are still photos, a lot of them, not yet in the public domain. We know the police have a lot of them, and I bet they're not going to publish them. More will be leaked. People aren't paying much attention to these fines at the moment. It will all be brought back up again. The next time Johnson is vulnerable, the public will be reminded about this scandal to go along with all the others, and his leadership will come under pressure again. He might survive yet again. The Tories are still trapped without an obvious successor to replace him with, so they may publicly attack Johnson's behaviour, like they did before, to try and get their constituents on side, but professionally refuse to do anything about it. We may get all the way to the general election, whenever that is, and Johnson may still be leading the party. Then, when it's too late for the Tories to change their leader, the motherlode may well be leaked. Even if Johnson somehow manages to prevent the photos submitted to the police being published, which I fully expect, and even if he somehow prevents the full Gray report being published as well, which would seem trickier but don't rule it out, he still faces the prospect of the people behind the leaks throwing everything at the general election. In fact, I would expect that the most damaging proof is deliberately being kept for then. If the next election campaign is even in the balance at that stage, renewed anger at Johnson could result in a lot of very tight seats being flipped. If Tory MPs do not consider this potential, even probable outcome at the front of their minds as they are considering their political calculations and keeping Johnson in place, then I think they are incredibly naive. But that is how I see Partygate ultimately going. I think it's entirely possible that Johnson will keep surviving the scandals because his party, given what he's survived over the last few months, his party clearly cannot conceive of anyone leading a better campaign. And then I think there's going to be a big leak at the next election. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.